All right. Welcome back to Practice Underwater. This is your host, George Hariri, and I got with me here today, Dr. Macarino, and I'm really, really excited for today's episode. It's always cool. This is the first time this has happened to me where I get to interview somebody that I look up to. And this is a guy that, him and I have very similar practices, and he's a little bit further along in the journey than I am. And so, at first he reached out to me. I was like, why are you reaching out to me? Like, what are you going to get out of this? And so then I looked at his numbers and I was still confused. And then I think towards the end of part one, you'll see why he reached out to me. So I'm really, really excited for today's episode.
Yeah, you'll see because the metrics don't tell the whole story. There's a whole other part of it, and that's the mindset stuff, and just like his experience in his office more so than like the money he's making or how well he's doing in the metrics. This is cool for me too because this is also a friend of mine. I do have some friends, George. You're not the only one with dental friends.
I didn't say I was, but
just
it's
to
also
make that clear.
It's also, I think I'll elaborate in the metrics in the outro about the metrics, because the metrics did play a part here. It just wasn't the type of part it typically plays. So we'll hop into the interview and then we'll see you guys in the outro. All right. Welcome back to another episode of Practice Underwater. I have with me here today, this is a doc that I've known for a long time. And this is an episode I'm really excited for because unlike any other, I'm interviewing a mentor. So this is a doc who has a practice similar to mine, and he's further along in that process. And so we already have discussed the fake name for this real doc, and it's Ace. And so our pet detective over here is going to help us out today. And I'm really excited about this interview because Ace is a good friend of mine, and he's somebody that I have routinely called on for advice in certain situations because we have similar practices. So how's it going today, Ace?
Great, George. How are you?
Good. So why don't you go ahead and just tell the audience a little bit about your practice, what brings you on, and I know you're a big fan of the show, so maybe talk about that a bit. Let's just kind of get right into it.
Well, as you've said before, the name Practice Underwater isn't necessarily just for people who feel like they're drowning with their practices. And I feel like with my office, I'm at sort of a crossroads where I feel like I could benefit from your psychoanalysis to see which direction would be right to proceed, because practices tend to take a character of their own. After a while, they become independent of your own ideas at some point, and so I'd like to see your vantage point with seeing practice by numbers, seeing the analytics, and seeing just an objective viewpoint of where you think might be a good idea to proceed.
Okay, yeah, because I was looking at your practice, Ace, and I'm like, why does this guy want to be on? He's killing it. Like this is really where I want my practice to be a year from now, is where yours is today. And in the kind of the timeline of ownership, you're about a year ahead of me. You got in about a year before me. So
Right.
It kind of seems like, I look up to guys like you. So tell us about first, I don't think I'd be doing Rohit a favor if I didn't talk about your initial impression. So I like to, before I give you any intake on my thoughts, I want to get your thoughts on, you switched to practice by numbers recently,
Right.
and you looked through your dashboard. So what were some of the things that stuck out to you?
Well, in terms of usability of practice by numbers, I'm a don't burn me at the stake, but I'm a previous dental intel user, and I'm a convert, so God have mercy on my soul. But we were with them for about a year, and I didn't use the platform as much as I should have, just because it was not user friendly at all. It was stilted. It was difficult to navigate. And now with practice by numbers, you're able to see production adjustments more accurately. Like that's my favorite thing, is that you can go in and see adjusted production by provider. You can get a really good, accurate portrayal of what you can expect your collections to be. So I just think that the dashboard's easier to use. The task management is easy to use as far as being able to assign follow-ups for overdue recall, that kind of thing. So it's just been a game changer, just from a knowledge perspective too.
is your staff, I know you have front desk staff that do overdue recare calls and stuff like that. Are they using Revenue IQ and Practice by Numbers?
They are now. I mean, it's very shocking to log in and see, holy cow, look how many people have slipped through the cracks the last 6 months, 9 months, a year. And we're full bore into the reactivation phase, because something with the difference between PBN and Dental Intel, we looked like we were doing pretty good according to Dental Intel, but when we turned on Practice by Numbers, it was a different story. So it's a very good tool.
So patients lost, is that one thing that really stuck out to you? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, like we've had a net increase in patients based on the dashboard that I've seen, but it hasn't been as dramatic an increase in total patient population. It's been very, very slow, simply because our attrition has been more than I thought it would be.
So take me through. So let's take like 5 steps back here,
Sure.
and let's go through your. So I don't want to do pre-ownership stuff. Let's just do, describe the practice you bought and
Okay.
how long ago you bought it and what's happened since.
Okay. I bought the practice 2 years ago. It's traditionally been a 2-doctor practice. It has been a 2-doctor practice for the past 10 plus years. It's still a 2-doctor practice. And we teeter, in my mind, on being completely busy enough to support a 2-doctor practice. And then there's days where I feel like we need to be a 1.5-doctor practice, just depending on how busy I want to be versus how busy I want my associate to be. And that's part of the mental gymnastics I've been going through as I listen to your perspective as opposed to Matt's perspective on things. Because your perspective is more of, hey, I want to pull the strings, I want to work on the business more than in the business, and bring in specialists, and that's one model, and I'm looking at doing that. I've brought in one specialist, and that's gone pretty well so far. But I don't know. We're at a crossroads, and I want to see if I want to continue to add providers or if I want to cut bad insurances and get more profitable per procedure. That's sort of the impasse that I'm at right now.
Okay. So what was the revenue of the practice when you bought it?
1.5, pretty
Okay.
predictably the last couple of years.
So 1.5 was about what you bought it at.
Yeah.
And then you guys are doing about 1.9 is the last 12 months.
Yeah, and we should be collecting $2 million this year.
Okay. So year to date, yeah, you guys are sitting. Yeah, you guys will do 2 million. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
So you don't. So your like chief complaint, the reason why you sent the email is,
I want help with direction.
Okay.
I feel like the PPO mix that we have, with insurances continually tightening the vice grips on us, I feel like I want to have a more resolute, concrete plan going forward as far as where am I going to dig my heels in? Am I going to dig my heels in as a Profi Palace, or am I going to dig my heels in as a pseudo specialist that does a lot of implants and full arch restorative? Because I've been doing a lot of CE in that vein, but I don't know if I want to fully jump off that cliff and go that direction, or if I want the relative safety of insulating myself with a bunch of a large volume practice.
Okay. So I feel like I have to ask the overhead question, because it feels like to me that's sort of where this is going. So currently, you'll do 2 million. What'll be your take home on the 2 million?
It'll be around 600,000.
Okay. So is that a problem? Do we want to change that? Or are you happy with that?
I'm happy with that. It's you're always programmed to think, oh, my overhead needs to be less, and if you're a solo doc, it's easier to get around 50%. But if you have associates, if you have a lot of staff, I mean, it's harder to get around that 50% number. But it's like you've said before. I mean, you have to pick your battles with that, because your overall overhead can be more, but then your quality of life can be better because you're not the one producing every single red cent that comes through. So the overhead, I think there's room for improvement, but I don't think it's a killer right now.
Okay. And so if nothing were to change for the next 10 years, you stay at this $600,000, like why do you feel like something has to change?
Maybe it has to do with a lot of the prevailing thoughts that go on Facebook and on the message boards about the changing dental landscape, the ever worsening dental economy, the fact that insurances are going to become even more restrictive on things, just maybe the fear mongering that you hear about how what we have right now is not sustainable in the current climate, and honestly, it's just the fact that I think a lot of us guys that strive for practice ownership in our younger years, we're restless by nature. We always want to improve. We always want to clarify our direction. Honestly, I think a lot of this comes from the fact that I read this book called Traction by Gino Wickman. Yeah, you're nodding your head. So with that, it's all about clarifying not only for yourself but for your team what your core values, your core focus, your 10-year plan, your marketing strategy, like having all that delineated clearly for everyone on your team. So really, it's me just saying, hey, here's my path. I want to forge ahead on this path with this end goal in mind. And I waffle on what I want that end goal to be. Do I need to have like a really large one doctor office where I'm like super GP and be more profitable? Or do I want to continue to grow the multi-provider model and make it more about other people so I can work more on rather than in the business?
Okay. So what I'm seeing is a fear of sustainability of your practice model,
Yes.
and reading Traction, which by the way, so I read Traction and I I don't know. The next thing I did was get Richard and Matt on a plane to fly out to Phoenix and made them read Traction. And
Nice.
that has very much changed the trajectory of shared practices. And early next year, I think that'll become more apparent. But yeah, that has been incredible. So okay, so it seems like you're kind of clinging on to this idea that you could make more money as a solo. Is that something that you believe?
Yes. Short term.
Okay, so let's just say you fire your associate tomorrow. You believe you'd make more money.
I believe I would keep a greater percentage of the total revenue,
Okay.
which is neither right nor wrong, but it is.
Mm-hmm. What is your practice note every month?
For the actual practice, it's 11,500, and then
Okay.
for the real estate, it's 3,500.
Okay. So your total facility expenses, let's call them 5,000 a month, because 3,500 in your note, and then you probably have $1,500 of other facility related expenses. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
Okay, so we got 16.5. That's stuck in stone. What about your team? Would you keep your team at the current size that it is?
No.
Okay. So how much? How many team members do you have, by the way? Kind of list off your team.
I have 16 team members.
16?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have how many front
Four
desk?
4.5 hygienists, 4 front office, 5 assistants, and an associate, and
There's 2 missing.
yeah, I may have miscounted. Yeah, I think it's 14.
14.
Once we get into double digits, it becomes a little nebulous.
Yeah, I'm there. I'm at 11.
Yeah.
Okay. So how many of those are you cutting?
I would cut 2, the 2 assistants dedicated to the associate.
Okay. And you would have 4.5 hygienists and
Then I would just be like a Profi Palace. Like that would be the difficult thing, is like, okay, keep all the hygiene and be on roller skates doing all the hygiene exams, or cut insurances, cut hygienists, cut total patient interactions.
And you're describing the last 3 or 4 months of my practice right now.
Right.
I'm in between associates, so I'm checking for 4 hygienists by myself.
Ooh.
Yeah. So you've cut 2 staff members, and so total increase in overhead. And how much does your associate make?
He's on pace to make about 140.
Okay. So you save an additional $12,000 a month. So you got 2 assistants that are cut. You're keeping all of your front desk. You're keeping everything except for your 2 assistants, and you fired your associate. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I would say you've saved $16,000 a month.
Sounds about right.
Do you feel like you could produce, and now you're working 5 days because you work 4 days, your associate works 5.
That's right.
So you work an extra day and you cut $16,000 a month in overhead, but you now have a smaller capacity.
True.
So do you see a situation in which you're more profitable?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Not even close.
I agree.
Ask me how I know.
Been there, done that. Yeah.
Right? So I'm in between associates right now, and my associate left in August. She took a teaching job, and then I have her replacement coming. Super excited about this particular associate. So I have a 4-month period where I'm by myself in this practice. And I was like, okay, well, this will be good. I'll make some money for a few months, and then I'll have my associate come back, and then I can take it easy again. So I worked harder and made less money.
That's amazing. See, that's so counterintuitive, but you're living it. I believe you.
No, I mean, like that. So let's just for a second dispel that idea.
Right.
Because you have $16,000 a month in fixed expenses. So that idea that in your practice with 4,000 patients, 4.5 hygienists, 4 front desk, and 3 assistants if you fire 2, you're not making more money as a solo. It's not happening.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah, you can sell your practice and go buy a $1 million practice, and then you make more money. You're shaking your head aggressively.
Sounds horrible. Yeah,
that sounds horrible. Yes, yeah. It does.
Yeah.
So, I feel like the productive solo model and that idea that like you're a Matt Garino where you just make a lot of money as a solo dentist working 4 days a week, that works in a practice with a small staff.
Right.
I got 2 team members in the back, 1 in the front, and I just kill myself and keep it all.
Yeah. No.
So too many, in my opinion, and I'm not supposed to give you my opinion, but I do it. Too many changes would have to be made to your practice to make it into that productive solo model.
Right. Yeah, and I think the only way that would be viable would be if it were done against my will, like in your situation where you had to tread water for however long between associates. That's the only way you would willingly go into that. I can see that now. Yeah.
I went into it being like, yes, I'm excited to make money. And it's so exhausting to sit there and produce. Like my average has been $7,000 to $8,000 a day on my side, and make the same.
Yeah. That's a gut punch looking at the reports at the end of the day.
You just feel like you can't keep up with your expenses.
Right.
So I'm looking at your practice right now, and I'm having the opposite realization of you just need to double down on what you do well. So let's kind of take that situation again, right? For $16,000 of added expenses, you increase your capacity by, let's just say, $40,000 a month with that associate. So, between checking more hygiene and another doctor producing. So the way for you to grow your practice is to do that again and again and again. Right? And then you can take time off. Do you want to continue to work 4 days, or do you want to cut down to 3?
I'd like to get down to 3 for sure. But then the path to doing that, to me, is systemizing the diagnosis, systemizing the treatment planning, systemizing the case acceptance to where I feel like there's no drop off between myself, my associate, future associates. That's where the traction thing comes in, is making it to where that's copy paste as much as possible. I mean, you can only do so much as far as empowering associates and replicating the owner doc's treatment philosophy. I mean, it can be done, but I think that's the next hurdle if we're going to persist on the multi-doc model.
So let me just, I'm trying to pull up your practice by numbers to see your associate's case acceptance. Okay. So I'm looking right here, and man, I can't say names here.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you had to guess, what is your associate's case acceptance, patient acceptance versus yours?
And we're talking about
percentage of patients that schedule.
Okay, so not treatment acceptance, just patient acceptance.
Correct.
I would say his is 60%.
Okay. And yours is?
75.
Okay. You ready?
Yeah.
Yours is 83. His is 82.
Wow, cool.
You've seen, so this is where you'll notice associates more, is you guys each saw about the same number of patients. You saw 2,000 patients and diagnosed 1.8 million, year to date. And he saw 2,200 patients and diagnosed 1.3.
Okay.
And then in about the same number of patients, you converted about $850,000 of treatment, and he converted about 620. So when I'm looking at your numbers, I see typical associate stuff.
Yeah.
Just less diagnosis, less treatment presented, less treatment converted. So in your head, you've kind of thought, okay, well, if I want that vision that George discussed, I need to systemize treatment planning. Why do you feel that way?
So that once there is the predominantly associate-driven model, that there's not the drop-off in diagnosis, treatment planning, production, case acceptance, all those things that come downstream of potentially not seeing the things the way that I see them. I mean, there's a discrepancy in the total dollar amount presented and accepted, but in terms of percentages of people getting diagnosed, it's about the same.
Yeah, it's mainly treatment plan size.
Yeah, right.
So what's the problem with your associate, your associate and associates not diagnosing as much as you?
I think it's confidence.
No, but why is that a problem?
But why is it a problem? Well, it's a problem because if I'm working on the practice and not seeing patients, then there has to be that, I have to get the EBITDA somehow. Like there has to be a baseline amount of diagnosis and production achieved in order for it to be profitable for me to sit behind a desk.
Correct.
Yeah.
So your mindset is simply, well, I need to ensure that I make enough, the practice is profitable so that I can afford to do this.
Right.
Okay. So that sounds to me like a way to, so the model of associates is inherently flawed.
Yes.
Like associates inherently will always have, to some degree, less diagnosis than an owner doc and less case acceptance. In your case, I kind of debunked it because his patient acceptance is about the same as yours, but his treatment plan size is a little smaller. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's over 2,000 patients. So that's not like a bad week. That's pretty.
That's a representative sample size.
So I would argue this. I would say, well, you can swim upstream all you want, and you can try to be the one doc that reinvents the associate model and makes it work in their practice. I would argue, why don't you do other things that can allow you to profit in spite of associates producing less than you based on the same number of patients?
So implants, big cases, do the stuff only I can do. Yeah.
Yeah, but also set up the office a little bit differently. So, like in my practice, we're opening up Fridays,
Okay.
and this is a way for me to. So I'm having 2 hygienists and an associate on Fridays, so that's an extra revenue generating opportunity. And in my mind, that's my way of offsetting the decrease in diagnosis, case acceptance, and conversion and productivity that the associate offers.
Sure.
So you expand your capacity in a way that through extra hygiene, more patients, you've made it up through volume.
Okay.
So you're sitting on 4,000 patients. And like you noticed, and I noticed, you have a very large overdue recare pool. Like if my practice was, so I have 4 hygienists and you have 4 hygienists. I have 4 hygienists on 2,100 patients. You have 4 hygienists on 4,000 patients.
Right.
So you could really have 6 hygienists if you guys were a little bit more tight on your retention.
Right. That's a
So
problem.
it is, but don't feel bad about it. But just know that, like, so if I could add 2 hygienists and get an extra doctor, well, now I don't need that doctor to be killing it because the total revenues generated from the extra patient flow in my practice with the same fixed expenses more than pay for that associate's added costs.
Bingo.
You see where I'm going?
Yes.
So I would advise against that idea of really like everybody, and I'm not saying don't try, right? It's your job as the clinical leader to diagnose with associates and have that be a thing. But at the end of the day, it sounded like you were like, well, if I'm going to do that, then I have to figure out treatment planning.
Yeah.
It's not a have to figure out. It would be nice if you improved it, but accept the fact that they'll never be you.
Okay. And I guess that's how DSOs, corporate, they're all able to make it work in spite of quote unquote imperfect treatment planning.
Yeah.
Case acceptance, all that. Okay.
It's really hard at this size when you have 14 employees, and in my case, 11, is to just accept the fact that, like, they're not always going to say the right thing when the patient walks in. They're not always going to call that right and say, like, it's not all going to happen the same way a productive solo's office does. This is not, I can't control everything that happens in my practice. That's not this game.
Right. It's a law of averages.
Yeah. And if you reappoint well and you bring in enough new patients and you do all of these things well, then you're going to do well. And if you just keep an eye on your metrics, then you don't have to audit these small things because you know what's happening.
You mentioned expanding hours and using that as a way to offset the fixed expenses. Have you toyed with doing early openings, late closings, like staggered schedules, anything like that?
So I have not,
Okay.
but I want to. So not in my practice yet or ever per se, but like in your practice, I would definitely look into it. Because, like, first of all, 4 front desk for 4 hygienists. I don't know about, like, I don't know. I feel like that could be spread out a bit.
Okay.
So maybe 4 front desk that maybe 3 of them are there at a time or something like that. And then you could sort of stretch out your fixed expenses over a longer period of hours.
Okay.
So how many ops do you have?
10.
10. Okay. So then in a day, kind of describe how those are being used.
I'm using 3. My associate's using 2 to 3, and then we have 4 hygiene, and then 5 hygiene on certain days.
Okay. How are those 5 hygiene days?
They're busy. They're brisk, but they're doable. You don't really, honestly, I think the people that feel the pull the most are the front office, just because there's more people checking out at the end of every hour. Just the volume is greater at certain times, and they notice it the most. But in terms of divvying up the hygiene checks, hasn't been an issue. We've implemented a new perio protocol over the past 6 months or so, and that's been very helpful in having more perio and also cutting down on the number of recall exams that we do
in
a given day.
So you guys have all 5 hygienists in that time are on the hour, every hour.
Yes, and that's low hanging fruit too, is to have someone start at 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, staggered with 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Like we've batted that around, and that just needs to get implemented.
Yeah, and that hygiene is a lovely thing to implement because everything is 6 months away.
Correct.
Right. Ask me how I know. Yeah, I had 3 hygienists in the office on 50-minute appointments for 6 months.
Have you gone back to 1 hour appointments, or are you still at
Yeah,
50
so
minute
we
appointments?
we bought the practice and they were at 50 minutes and I wanted them up to an hour and they kind of joke with me because I added 10 minutes to their time, but then I asked them to do like 10 extra things. So
You get a
they
minute for each thing. What are you
yeah,
complaining
yeah.
about?
So so it was funny, but they're awesome. And yeah, but so that took 6 months to get into effect. But yeah, so that's like a simple thing that you could do, because ultimately, uh, but that I don't think that would be like a meaningful thing to talk about on this call. It seems pretty minute. I guess the thing that I'm noticing is, I think there's some stuff holding you back from that like big practice with 3 docs and 7 hygienists. But that's really what you are, and it just doesn't seem like you want to acknowledge it.
I think that model has always seemed so unwieldy to me, where it's hard to manage, hard to maintain. There's a critical mass you have to reach, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe I think, well, I'm not at that critical mass yet where that much production, that many mouths to feed could be supported. And I think if we can tap into that overdue recall pool and get those patients back in on a regular basis, grow our hygiene, then perhaps that's possible. Another factor is I think our diagnosis per doctor, myself included, is low. And I think because there's practices that do 1.5 in revenue off of one hygienist. Like there's some. I mean, look at Matt. I mean, there's people that do more with less, and I think
Um,
that could be a factor.
so describe to me your marketing process.
It's been fairly minimal. We do Google AdWords. We use Swell to help us with our Google reviews. We do. I have a local marketing firm helping out with the Facebook page and filming some organic video content, putting that up periodically. Most of our stuff's been digital. We tried some billboards for a year. The ROI on that was pretty negligible directly that we could measure. But there has not been a real full-fledged, like every door direct mail or any kind of concerted marketing effort aside from online dabbling.
Okay, and when you bought the practice, I'll just pull it up here. So
Yeah,
what? So I see here that. So what has the new patient flow changed at all? It looks like you guys are seeing about 80 a month. It's kind of
yeah.
what you've averaged out this year.
hmm
It has that always been 80 a month, or was it
No,
less?
it was less at the outset.
What was it at the outset?
Probably closer to 40, 40 to 50.
Okay, so you guys got an additional 30.
Yeah.
If I want to schedule a new patient appointment in your office, how long am I waiting?
Right now, about as of last week, 3 weeks to a month, which is longer than I'd like it to be. I'd like it to be 2 weeks or less
So why is it not 2 weeks or less?
because I need to add capacity to the hygiene department to be able to get someone in quicker.
Okay, you use this word unwieldy. So
Yeah.
the shared practices guys make fun of me because I don't know what very many words mean. So what does unwieldy mean?
I would define it as meaning difficult to manage, difficult to control, difficult to maintain,
Okay. So you don't
cumbersome.
want it to become so big that the wheels fall off the train and then you're kind of like, oh crap, I have this really high overhead, huge thing that just can't be sustained.
Correct.
You're already there.
Right.
So like, dude, you got 14 employees. Like, I think you resisting that growth that is necessary is more of an issue than anything else.
Okay.
Like, you know what I mean? Like that whole idea that your overhead is $1.4 million a year. Like that's already big. Just embrace it.
Yeah.
I mean, my overhead is over $1 million a year. It's insane.
Yeah.
But that's this game, and I think it's just owning that, and like whether or not you like it, the practice that you're in is calling for it. It needs that bigger size. You have high new patient flow, you have large attrition, but your practice is wanting to be bigger, and I think it's just kind of so. How does your team like? Are you the one that's really the leader of the practice, and your whole team follows?
Yes.
What about your office manager? Do you have one?
Don't have one. I'm grooming someone to be one, but there is not an office manager in name right now.
Oh. Wow. I did not see that coming.
Curveball.
Matt has an office manager with a staff of like 5, and he calls her his office manager. And I haven't said anything to him yet, but he'll listen to this and laugh because it's just his one front desk. Well, he has like a second front desk, but it's more like a, part-time type thing. But yeah, oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
So vacation days, that goes through you?
Yeah.
And payroll?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go.
Yeah. I'm the rate limiting step on a lot of those things, I think.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, I think we need to just like take a minute, and this is too big of a topic for the end of this part 1, because this is just a huge topic here. So, all right, I'm just gonna go into it. I can't wait. So, yeah, dude, that's it. That feeling of it feels like you can't manage your size.
No.
Because you can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't. No, of course not.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're managing this thing like it's a 3 staff, 4 staff, 5 staff office. I mean, you got 14 employees, dude.
Right.
Like, so you're handling your associates' compensation?
Yeah.
Okay. So, like, what do you delegate?
That's what I'm working on. I'm involving, after reading Traction, I'm cultivating a leadership team, and we've been meeting and we've been working through vision, goals, all these things, and I'm grooming them to help me delegate. And we're defining who's going to be over which section of the office so that there's that pyramid scheme type arrangement where, they report to the mid-level people report to me, so that I have fewer direct reports, so to speak.
Yeah. So let me tell you. So this is very much, yes. So Traction had the same realization on me. I had an office manager, and I've been kind of delegating everything to her. Ever since I've had associates, she's always handled compensation and all that stuff with them. I give her the associate contract, and I pretty much tell her to enforce it. And employee handbook, same thing. But what Traction has really introduced into my life is department leads. So now I have a lead assistant, a lead hygienist, and then my office manager right now is a lead front desk. But so like we hired a hygienist recently, and my office manager put up the ad. My lead hygienist looked through the resumes. All of my hygienists and my office manager interviewed, and they hired without me meeting the candidate.
That sounds amazing.
Like that's what you need.
Yep.
Right? Because then an extra hygienist doesn't seem like anything other than you telling your office manager, hey, it's time for an extra hygienist. Do it. Right? You have no leadership. You have no infrastructure in place.
I think a lot of that is a holdover from the previous regime. That's the way it was run. Sort of top-down, Napoleon complex kind of situation. And so I've inherited that, and I haven't been as forward thinking about changing it as I should have been.
Okay. And, but yeah, I mean, the wheels falling off the bus, you've been attributing to a cost thing, like the desire to be a solo, cut your associate, 2 staff members, like everything is so cost oriented. But establishing this leadership team doesn't cost you anything.
Right.
And so that like ability to, so I think we've been talking about cost this whole time, but we really have been meaning like ownership, tasks, and bandwidth.
I agree.
To me, that feels like the real problem.
George, you're a genius.
Dude. This is cool for me. Okay, we'll wrap up part 1 right now. We'll get into part 2, but this is really cool for me because you're a guy that I look up to, and I call you and I ask you questions about my practice, and I like that. That's the kind of relationship we have. And so, Ace, you're you don't give yourself enough credit. Like, you bought this practice doing 1.5, and you're sitting here gonna do 2 in year 2, and it's normal. Like, the wheels fall off the train when you get too big, and then you got to put the wheels back on the train, and then you keep going.
Exactly. Sounds
All right,
great.
So we're going to go to part 2. Let's recap it, though. So I haven't really talked about your metrics. So we talked about your metrics. You're about a $2 million office. And when I look at your reappointment rate, you're definitely high 80s. It seems like that was a dental intel number that you were tracking.
Mm-hmm.
And the dental intel number that you were not tracking was your number of patients that you've lost. So in the past 12 months, you've seen 988 new patients, which puts you at about 80 a month. And you've been losing about 100 new patients a month, or 100 patients a month out your back door. So that's, I bet the reappointment rate wasn't always that high. And so back before it was that high, all those patients are currently on their way out. So that, really has, that's kind of what we're seeing. And the reality of the situation is your practice is just, it has so much potential, like 4,000 active patients. It has so much potential to be so much bigger than it is. And this whole call, I'm trying to figure out, why are you trying to make a 4,000 patient practice a solo office? Like, to me, that,
well, it's like you said, the bandwidth, that was my
that was your block.
Well, yeah. And it was my gut feeling to say, hey, let's simplify, but we need to simplify in other ways of delegating instead of cutting.
Exactly. Yeah. So like, you talk to Matt Garino. Matt Garino, for example, has 1/3 of the patients you do.
But he collects more than I do, probably.
He does. You'll probably barely beat him. Not that makes you feel better.
two dentists.
Anyway, so I wouldn't compare yourself to Matt, though, because Matt has some unique abilities that put him in a conversation that I don't think it's fair to put other people in that conversation.
Right.
Matt also does more than my practice, by himself with one hygienist. That's Matt. Yeah. That is not Ace. That is not George. So like, own who you are. Right. I'm this guy who has this big ship, and like, you can hit 3 million.
Yeah.
Garino can't. So he can hit 2 million all he wants, but you can hit 3. So there's things that you have that he doesn't. And so I don't know. I think it's very dangerous when you compare yourself to a Justin Short or a Matt Garino or somebody like that who does it because of who they are as a dentist. And, like, what I do really well is the stuff that we're going to talk about in part 2, the delegating, the leadership, the stuff like that, managing the big team. And that's stuff that Matt's learning from me on, so we all have our own strengths and weaknesses. And, I think it's just owning them. So that's one thing I want us to talk about in part 2 is really your unique abilities, and sort of like you've read Traction. So I think we can talk about it the same language. So we'll sign off for part 1, and then we'll go right into part 2. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that interview. It was a lot of fun for me, and I hope we left it at kind of a bit of a cliffhanger, so to speak. Next week's episode is really cool, where we kind of outlined the leadership structure and his practice. But this was really cool. It took me, like, I don't know if you guys can tell, but I walk into these interviews with like no information. I don't do any prep work. I literally pull up the dashboard for the first time, like on air, exploring and trying to figure out what's going on. And So you kind of like, I was trying to wonder, why is this guy on here and why is he, wanting to go solo? Like that was his thing. He's like, I'm either going to stay as a group and like streamline diagnosis, or I'm going to go solo. And, in my head, and I think this is where the metrics really played a role, where they don't typically play a role, is the metrics, we understand because we've, spent a lot of time with this. I think one of the things we do well is understanding our clients' metrics. And so he is so a group practice. Like this guy cannot be a solo with 4,000 patients. Like there's so much about his practice is a group practice. His new patient flow, his retention, everything is screaming that this is a group practice. And yet he's still like trying so hard to be a solo. And so I was super confused. And then I feel like the office manager thing just made all the sense in the world.
Yeah, and George, I want to commend you on this interview. I thought you did amazingly well. Your ability to create the new awareness in this doc, like things he didn't think of, like the aha moments where he got like quiet, didn't have anything to say. That happened like 4 times. So like really, like honestly amazing as like a fellow coach and someone just like listening to that in that realm. So give me some chills.
Why, like, I don't know if it's obvious to you guys, but practice underwater has been the most fun thing I've ever done on air ever. Not even close. And what makes it the most fun is that moment. When you can get that moment, it's like I golf and like 80% of my shots suck. 19% are like, okay. And then 1% of them are like, awesome, great shot. And that's what keeps you coming back. And it was like that same thing here where it was like the ability to get this guy who is extremely successful, who is doing incredibly well, to have that epiphany moment and to have created it for him. And then like, afterwards, the text I got from him, that's the reason why I love this show. And it's so cool. And coaching is the same thing, obviously, but just on a more private basis. But like, yeah, I mean, that's what keeps me coming back.
What did the text say?
Oh, I mean, it was just of gratitude, right? Like, thanks for totally like, you can tell when somebody comes on when they're successful. And, we've gotten a fair amount of successful docs, 500K plus earnings on the show. And you're like, you kind of figure out like, why are you here? And it's always that something doesn't feel right in their life. And then when you're able to help them identify what that is, that aha moment goes off. And it's incredibly powerful and really, really fun to be a part of.
Yeah. And I think that's why I really like this interview, especially because it didn't follow kind of like the typical interview we have, where it's like, mindset, then getting into metrics and talking a lot about metrics. You basically just use the metrics to make this one big determination for him that he was struggling with. Am I a group or am I a solo? And you, as you pointed to in the interview, and I loved how you do it with like, oh, how much is it going to save to become a solo? Like, like you're going to save you $16,000 in overhead.
Yeah. His overhead's like $115 a month. Like, like the overhead savings and cutting his capacity in half are like, yeah, I mean,
yeah. And requiring major shakeups and firing people and dropping
all
insurances.
this to make less money. Yeah.
Make less money, which was like incredible.
So I guess I would have never had that realization though, because in my experience with coaching, a lot of what I was being told was be a solo doc to make more money, be a solo doc to make more money. And him and I had the same coach. So, we kind of heard the same thing. And so I see where it came from. And if I had not spent the last 4 months as a solo doc, working harder, making less money in my group practice, yeah, I would have told him, yeah, cut the staff, fire the associate, their diagnosis is going to go up, and like all the things that don't happen in reality. And it was just my ability to live that experience and to ask me how I know thing that we like to say a lot is, very much rang true for me here in this instance. Cause, I was like, okay, I'll be by myself for 4 months, but I'll make a lot of money. And I was like, no, I'll be by myself for months. I'll work hard and not make as much money. Cool.
Yeah. And you can see how long it took it for him to actually get that idea and shift from it. Like he had this idea, solo docs who were doing well, make more money than group owners.
Yeah.
And you clearly debunked that on the show. I'm just excited I'm going to reach out to this person and see like the steps he's taken since the interview to like move this forward. Very excited.
Yeah, and he's done stuff. I mean, he's texted me. He's definitely getting stuff done. And so I think the second thing I do want to talk about is the desire to simplify was like, okay, why does he want to simplify? And the office manager was a huge piece. Like an office manager is an essential component to this practice. Like, was this the interview where I said that his 25% staff costs are too low?
Yeah. Either
I don't know if that was part 1 or part
sure.
2. Well, at some point I asked him what his staff costs were, and he said 25%. Because I felt like he was getting resistant to the idea of like promoting of bringing an additional person on. And the idea is like really that to have a sustainable group practice where you don't feel like that, like, yeah, you need to have a solid amount of infrastructure. And like for a solo, if your staff costs are 20% or lower, like you don't have enough infrastructure. And for a group practice, 25% is kind of the same thing. Like you don't have enough infrastructure in place and it's too dependent on, there's something's missing, like it's hard to sustain that level of staff overhead. And so in his case, he's missing an office manager. All vacation requests, all time off for 14 people, all HR issues, anybody who needs anything corrected, like everything goes through him. Yeah, that's exhausting. That's 14 people. Like something is going on every day in my practice with somebody. Like it's like, oh, what HR issue am I going to have today? But like it's the reality is I'm not dealing with it. I have somebody else dealing with it because I can and he should, and so that's the big difference.
I need to go on a little rant here. I don't understand the dentist aversion to having an office manager, no matter how big a size your practice is. Like, I don't get it. Like, what is the hesitation towards tasking someone with all the office stuff that you don't want to deal with to this person who takes ownership of it? Is it just they don't want to spend the extra money that they might cost?
Yeah, I think the office manager traditionally makes more than a regular front desk. So it's hard to, if you're not big enough, to justify that expense. I think that's the rationale behind not having one. I don't know. Maybe if I was a solo, I'd be a totally different person. So, I don't know if I'd still have an office manager, but
there's still like in a staff of 6, there's still plenty of HR stuff, plenty of stuff going on that you don't want to deal with that I couldn't even imagine taking on myself and not having this person to turn to.
And like having an associate, that's a big deal. Like you got to deal with their compensation, their day sheets, there's a lot of stuff that comes with like enforcing the contract properly. Like that, like you can't be doing that. You can't be calling in payroll when you have 14 employees. Like in my opinion, you really need to have a level of infrastructure where that stuff doesn't come through you. You need to be, and like, he's needed a hygienist for how long and not had one yet? Like, that's just ownership fatigue. Like he's holding his practice back. And he gets it. I'm being hard on him because he's a buddy and he can take it and he gets it, so.
No, I mean, the thing I like about the position is it's someone else who's really invested in growing the practice and like the actual numbers of the practice. Like there's someone else looking at that, like a receptionist, a front desk, insurance coordinator. They're not really going to be looking at that like you are. This person, if incentivized and if for like the right fit of a person, she will or he will. So I think, I don't know. I will stand on the hill that is an essential part of any office.
I won't be there with any. All I know is group. I've never had a solo with an office manager, but I think every group practice. Yeah, if you got 2 docs, office manager for sure.
If you got 1 doc, office manager. I'll die on the hill. I'll be up there alone. I'll still do it.
That's so you. All right. So we're going to see you guys next week. And next week will be cool. This is really not Matt's type of interview next week where we kind of go through organizational infrastructure in an office. But it really is important in my opinion. And it kind of shows there's some leadership components to that. So I'm excited for next week. This was very much this was totally random too. It's not like we gave this to me because we knew that Ace had a group practice. It just kind of fell in my lap and, but it was cool. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you guys next week on Practice Underwater. Thanks for listening to another episode of Practice Underwater. We'll see you guys next week.
If you're interested in one-on-one coaching with either Dr. George Hariri or Dr. Matt Garino, our contact emails are in the show notes.
And if you're interested in being on Practice Underwater as a guest, where we could look at your practice anonymously, you can go ahead and contact the email in the show notes and follow those directions to get on the show. Thanks, and we'll see you guys next week on Practice Underwater.